to put this down even another notch. You can see me over the podium. I am Betsy Solero. I'm, as Nicholas said, I'm the Director of Brand Marketing at the JAMA Network. Just a little bit about who we are. First, we're right down the street. If you have had a chance to walk around, we're really, really close, right down the river in the old, sorry, I can go down one. In the old IBM building, so it's right here. And if you haven't taken the architecture cruise in Chicago, you should go out and do it right now. So JAMA is our flagship journal, and we also publish 11 specialty journals. Last week, we launched our first general medical open access journal, JAMA Network Open. We also have a suite of apps, videos, podcasts, and a full suite of websites. I'm sure there are publishers and vendors of all sizes in the room, so it may help to know that we're a society publisher, a fairly large society publisher, and we are hosted on Silverchair. So I'd like to start with a quote from the Harvard Business Review that maybe some of you might have seen before, but it's that marketing has become too important to be left just to the marketers. All employees must be engaged with it, which I would add, whether they want to be or not. So this quote is from 2014, but I think it's even more relevant now. If you start to think about how marketing has changed, and Stephanie touched on this over the past 5 to 10 years, it'll start to hit home, just how your own jobs have changed and how we've all changed our thinking. So it's no longer possible to just toss a new product over the hedgerow into marketing and say, go figure it out, go put this out there and see what happens. You could do that, and it still happens, believe me. But I think you'd realize pretty quickly that there's something wrong with that plan. Whoop. How do I go backwards? There you go. So there are many ways to integrate marketing into a publishing organization, especially a professional society, as Todd mentioned, as you can imagine. More and more market activities, I've listed a bunch of them on this slide. I'm not going to read them out to you, may report up into different areas of an organization. So it's not just one little team in marketing doing all of this work. Content marketing may report into editorial, for example. Analytics may report to product management, digital marketing up to product management. It just varies a lot from company to company. The one thing I do think is very important with this sort of fractured structure is to have someone or some department, such as brand marketing, for example, responsible for the overall marketing plan and messaging for a single project, no matter where all the different tactics live in the organization. So I'm going to talk about 2 case studies that I hope will illustrate how we at JAMA have worked together across departments to tackle 2 very different goals over the past several years. I'd like to think about these more in terms of task forces instead of cross-departmental project teams. I think it's a nicer way to think about it. So the first case is author outreach. This is what we call the way we engage our authors in a very broad sense. It's a broad term, and we kept it intentionally broad, but it really describes a single focus. The authors are our most important audience, I would say. They publish the research in our journals, and they've also more recently with our open access journal, they're now actual customers, so we need to think about them in a totally different way. I'm going to focus mostly on the aspects of author outreach that intersect with marketing, but keep in mind there's a large part of this that sits squarely in editorial, and they're sitting in the room, so the people who work on this with me. Briefly, we cover at JAMA more than 50 medical conferences a year in some way, shape, or form. We have what we would call the full treatment, where we have an exhibit booth. We would have simultaneously published papers. We would have a social event like a cocktail reception, a dedicated microsite, many things going on, to the opposite end of the spectrum, where it might just be social media support or slides for an author to have at the end of his or her presentation. This is some pictures of our team at work. You can see we have a Meet the Editor session going on, and those are some pictures of our booth. Not everybody on the team has to work in the booth. There are some who would never, ever want to have to do that, but we try to get everybody out there as often as we can. So why did we do this? You can see our goals here at the top, and it's pretty obvious why you would do this. And it's not that this type of activity wasn't happening before we formed this team. It was really just happening in different departments and in a very fractured way. We were also going through some very major changes in the organization at the time. We were making the transition, like many in the room, from being primarily known as a print publisher to being an online publisher with some print journals. It was about the time we launched on Silverchair, actually, that this was all happening. We also launched the JAMA Network brand, which was an entirely new, a new thing for us. We did that in order to bring all of the journals that we were publishing, which had different names. They were called the Archives of whatever specialty, closer to the JAMA Network umbrella brand, and then integrate all of the products together online. We also had a leadership change, so we had a new editor-in-chief and a new publisher all at the same time. So we had a lot to communicate at one time. So we put together a team with members chiefly from editorial and marketing, and we worked with others on the periphery and to a lesser extent, product management, social media, media relations, and creative design. Importantly, we added a full-time staff member to work on author outreach, and she's sitting right over here in the room. So what were some of the challenges to doing this? Aside from the author outreach coordinator, Caroline, everyone else already had a full-time job, so this was being added on to what we currently did. So we had to figure out how to fit that in, and there are a variety of ways you can do that, but basically it involves getting buy-in from everyone who's involved. And managing expectations of everyone for a program like this can be a real balancing act. For a shiny new journal, that journal will get the full treatment for a full year or two or whatever it takes, and a more well-established journal might not get as much attention. So you have to be sure that everyone on the team understands how to communicate that to the editors who may expect, I want to be at that meeting, why can't I have this, that type of thing. And the other thing I'd like to talk about, the challenge that was kind of the most interesting one for us as an organization was the cross-departmental friction that exists, and that exists in any organization. It's important to keep in mind that although everyone has the same goal in mind, the end game is the same, people's individual and departmental goals may conflict with each other, and you have to find a way to work beyond that. On the other hand, this kind of friction and tension between different departments can really be a positive. It comes from a place of we're all very passionate about what we do, and so everybody just wants to do the best job, but sometimes those goals do conflict. And especially in this case, and in every publishing job I've ever had, there's sort of a natural tension between editorial and marketing or publishing or whatever you want to call it, for good reasons. But there's a reason we called this author outreach and not author marketing. I think the term marketing itself is fraught sometimes, and it can be certainly unpalatable to some people in an organization, so just try to avoid it sometimes when it works in your favor. So which metrics did we use to measure this? I think everybody's already mentioned that certain things are really hard to figure out, what ROI, how are you going to determine that this is a success? And there are any number of ways you can do that. A bunch of the ones that we consider are listed on this slide. I mentioned agreeing on goals. And it's interesting, I think if you asked any one member of the team, why is this successful, what works for you, you might still get a slightly different answer from every person. And everybody likes different metrics. I happen to like alt metrics. I think they're more fun than something else, but that's just me. The important thing, like I said, is just agree on what you're going to use. You'll need to agree to figure out how to plan your budget and how to communicate up and down about what you're doing. So what did we learn from this? I talked about some of this in the goals, but I'll just emphasize again on a really practical level that having one person running meetings is really key, and having a shared workspace. We keep everything on a SharePoint site that we would, I don't know what I'd do without the SharePoint site where everything is, and it's very well maintained, so that's super important to a program like this. Also, we found that providing ample feedback, including photos like the ones I showed before, is vital. So much of this type of work is done outside the building and with people who aren't in the building every day, with the editors and editorial boards and authors, that it's important to communicate that back, because people who are doing all the work for this are sometimes not front and center. So, for example, if somebody wakes up at 4 a.m. to work on an alert or release a paper that's being simultaneously presented at a meeting, just try and take a picture of that person with the author and send it back. Just do things like that to make sure that everyone is understanding that it has meaning in the outside world. And I think we've had some good luck with that. We've developed a pretty good system of reporting and photographing things and sending it back. So with that, I'd like to move on to my second case study, which is a completely different type of thing. And I would say here in this case, it's more like a special force and less of a task force. So less of an operationalized, a department that functions year over year. And I think if anybody was in the session this morning, Ann Michael's session where Paul G. spoke about our app, was anybody there? I don't know. Okay, he mentioned this and talked about the process that was used, and I'm going to talk about the marketing side of that. So what we did is the development process. This was how marketing and product development worked together to bring an idea to the point at which we could make a decision, or senior management can make a decision on whether to actually build a product. So it's not building it, it's just creating a process that gets us to a point where we can say, yeah, we're going to build it, no, we're not going to build it. So that's what we did. Spoiler alert, in this case, we did build it. Here it is. It's called JN Listen, and you can all check it out. It's in the Apple App Store, and we're just now starting to, it's been in free trial phase, and we're just starting to implement the business model for this app. So basically, it's a podcast app, and it includes CME quizzes. So why did we do it? In this case, we had some very positive numbers in the podcast downloads. We had heard that they were popular, so the product development team and editorial, everyone was in on this research. We'd also heard anecdotally and through some contextual design research that younger physicians and residents really liked audio, and they were looking for a high-quality source of peer-reviewed content that they could learn from, but also listen to and be entertained by. It was also around the time when Serial was on NPR, and everyone was listening to it, so it was this huge boom in podcast listening. Building an app like this also aligned with the goals of presenting content in new ways and engaging audiences that we felt were not as familiar with our brand the way we wanted them to be familiar with it. In other words, they knew what JAMA was, but they pictured a print journal perhaps sitting on a table, and we were out to change that with this younger audience. So here, the collaboration was between product development, particularly a dev lab team of, 3 people, and market research, and some UX and creative design. So what was our approach? You heard a little bit about this if you were in that other session, but it was to create a really small cross-functional team, and we're very fortunate to have a product development team in the building. And I don't know, it's a great resource to have if you can at all do it. And then we have one person on my team who is sort of part-time devoted to market research. So not her full-time job, but she was devoted to this effort, working with this team. And then we involved others on the periphery when necessary, but as Paul mentioned this morning, it's very important to keep this team small. You do not want to waste time on something that potentially could not succeed or might fail, and you want to fail fast. So we had our product development director outlined a process that had various checkpoints along the way that we could stop and say, okay, what's the research telling us? What's the technology going to be able to do? What's feasible in terms of technology, and do we want to move forward? And we also identified a steering committee of senior management, so they would meet, and they were the ones who ultimately had the authority to say, not going to work, or yes, please move forward. So what was marketing's role in all of this? It's a lot of product development definitely are the chief operators in this situation, but marketing has an important role to play. And these are some of the ways, we were involved, our team, and they included, working with vendors on running workshops, coming up with a competitive landscape, which was particularly important, pulling together research from other sources. We have the larger AMA market research at our disposal, and they have a lot of information on physicians, so we're able to leverage that. And just generally, trying to be the voice of the customer, remembering who you're serving throughout the entire process. And this slide, this is a picture of one of the workshops that we did. This is a great way to engage people. We eventually used what we learned in these brainstorming workshops. That informs your marketing message when you're ready to go to market with an actual product. So all of this is feeding into your later marketing plans and messaging, and how you think about the product once it goes to development. So what did we learn from this? This was a new process at the time, and I think we actually had a lot to learn, and we did learn a lot. I think others in the room from the AMA might agree. We had launched previous apps without going through a process and without doing a lot of research beforehand, and they were, well built and fine, but perhaps there was one fatal flaw with the app that made it not succeed in the market, and we pulled it off and working on some of this. This is happening now. We're pulling some off and redoing, rethinking with this new process of research and information. It's just harder to make a lot of changes after the thing is built. A few things we learned was stick to the process, stick to your goals, throughout, even if things feel like they're veering off course, you're having scope creep, or somebody decides there's this great new feature you want to add, try and stick with what you're doing, because you're getting a lot of information from different areas. Also, believe in the research, believe what you're seeing, and trust that it's been, I mean, if you don't think it's been well done, that's one thing, but generally believe what you're seeing, because it might tell you that nobody really wants what you're proposing, there's a fatal flaw, or that somebody else is out there doing it and doing it better for whatever reason. They may have more resources, whatever. And also get buy-in and create excitement around the app during the process, but without wasting people's time. I mentioned this workshop with all the Post-its on the wall on that previous slide, but it's a great way to get people involved, and then when they see it actually come to fruition, they remember that, and they say, oh, it's a part of that. That was actually my idea. I thought of that slogan. I thought of this. So it's a really nice way to do that without having people devote tons of time to something that ultimately doesn't get built. So I've been through those pretty quickly, but I just wanted to sum up with a few pretty simple things to keep in mind when you're collaborating with other departments across an organization. And you know, it's always, everybody in this room knows this, but it's good to revisit it and think about your audience. Think about your internal audience first. You know, use terminology that makes sense to everyone, that everyone understands. For example, when I work with the product development team, I have no idea what they're talking about half the time, I admit it. And I say, what does that mean? What are you doing? I don't understand what plexus is. I don't know. You know, so I need a translator sometimes. But it's very important that everybody understand that. So ask a lot of questions. And then communicate in other directions about what you're doing, up, down, in, out. Just keep everybody on the same page if you can. And even with the term marketing, I'll say that again. Everybody is doing marketing. Without realizing it, they're doing it. And sometimes you just don't want to say, oh, you're doing marketing. You just want to call it something else, call it outreach, call it audience insight. So people who may be averse to doing marketing or spinning things don't feel like they're getting their hands dirty. That's just a little PR tip. And finally, I think it's important to give credit where it's due and try not to be too territorial about marketing ideas or what you consider to be a traditional marketing role. Breaking down borders and welcoming good ideas from anyone in the organization will break down the walls and make you look better in the long run, which is actually what you want. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
Thanks. Questions?
Great. Thank you to our speakers. And we have about 10 minutes for questions. Todd has a mic, so please raise your hand, and we'll give everyone a minute. We got one over there. Bert?
So Bert Corelli with TrendMD. I'm curious on the panel, what's been the impact of social media marketing in recent years, where it's become more of a part of marketing departments? You know, in terms of cost, in terms of building expertise, or hiring new people, or repurposing existing people.
That's a good question. In some ways, it's presented a lot of opportunities because it's free, and it's something that you can easily get messages out to a lot of people. At the same time, it can become a bit of a time suck. You know, you can pour too much into it. So, you know, for us, we really, like I was saying earlier, prioritize engagement and making things personal. So we really try and make sure it's very curated content, so that when we do it, it's stuff we're actually reading and things we're actually talking about, and not just content for content's sake. I think that's a bit of a danger with social media. There was another part of your question. The cost of, yeah. Well, and you know, there's, I think recently with the changes that Facebook has made after everything that happened, a lot of people relied on Facebook's ad algorithms almost exclusively to reach people, and a lot of people in the publishing sphere, not so much scholarly publishing probably, but were completely upended their marketing plans. And so I think that one thing to take away from it is, you know, building a genuine audience, people who are actually listening, who you actually know and meet, is really where those things can benefit you.
Hello. I would just add that I think it's hard sometimes to justify devoting resources to social media, because sometimes it's more difficult to tie social media activity back to sales. So I think that can be a tough thing within an organization to get enough resources devoted to social, but it's not an area that you can ignore, so it's kind of a difficult spot to be in because you have to have enough activity and somehow justify the resource.
Hello. From a brand standpoint, I think I look at it a little bit differently. Our social media, we have a team devoted to social media for the journals, and I look at it from more of a brand perspective and a product perspective. So for me, it's more about getting the balance right between promoting the content and driving traffic to the website, obviously, but also promoting our products and not sort of polluting our content marketing with product marketing and getting that balance right. And also keeping the messaging and the branding together. We have our creative design directors in the room, and I'm sure she could speak to that too. So that's.
Thank you. A couple of you talked about the challenge of certain marketing activities being a little bit more difficult to measure the success of, and talked about ROIs, and a lot of those metrics are getting better, but those challenges still exist. I was wondering if you had any advice on managing up, especially at budget time, to justify costs of things that you want to do that maybe aren't so easy to show the value of.
I think I would say in that regard, it goes back to what I said about constant communication about what you're doing, and then I think you have to sort of cultivate that throughout your year, and then it will when it comes time to budget, there are no surprises. So you don't want to. That's the advice it's going to be different at every organization and with every type of senior management personality, I guess I would even say, is that you just need to keep in mind just no surprises and be reasonable. If it's really not working, it's not going to work. Trade show exhibiting is impossible. It's really, really hard to tell. So, is it we see a value in it because we take it very seriously, and we do cut things that we don't think are successful for any number of those reasons I showed. So I think if you can just stay in constant communication about it, provide a lot of feedback, and that'll help you out. That's my best advice.
I think I would just add to what you're saying. I think from the outset, sharing the metrics that you are going to use to measure success from the outset, I think is important, because then when you share those metrics later, you can you can help justify something if you've established what the metrics are going to be.
And I think you can also have in mind something you're going to cut. Think about that.
Yeah. I think, as you were saying, for conferences, that's particularly a tough one. And I know when I was at UVA Press, conferences and also advertising, it's hard to get, authors want print ads in specific journals, and it's really hard to measure ROI on that. And so, eventually we got to a point where we said, we're not framing this as what sales does this lead to? This is author support. This is author engagement. We don't do this for sales. We do it because our authors want it, and we want our authors to be happy. So maybe framing it in a different way that's not necessarily going to result in dollar signs, but it results in sort of an overall brand awareness can be helpful.
I wonder if you'd discuss any changes that you've had to make due to GDPR.
Grown, we, at Silverchair, we've done a lot because we not only have to do things for our own marketing and our own sites, but we also do it for all of our publishers' sites and all the things that they need. So a lot of things like, updating privacy policies. Everyone's gotten a million emails about updated privacy policies. So there was that, email campaigns to make sure people are opting in properly. We, luckily, if you use MailChimp, they made it extremely easy. They have all these forms that you can make sure you're GDPR compliant. They're logging everything they need to log. But all the pop-up cookies on our website, there's a lot that's been done. But it also is good because for the most part we didn't have any big problem areas. But it really does make you look at, well, how am I storing this data? Is this spreadsheet on my desktop a privacy violation? And so it really makes you look at things. And so ultimately I think it's a huge benefit.
I don't really have much to add to that aside from we took a look at everything we were doing. We updated our privacy policy. We have the cookies in place, the whatever we call them, top toast, the official term. And we felt pretty good about what we were actually doing. But it was very good to take a look at what policies we already had in place. So.
Yeah, I would just say we've taken pretty much the same actions. Updating opt-in pages, communicating policies, that sort of thing.
So I have a question, and I have a question actually, I think it's mostly for Stephanie, but I'd love to hear your other thoughts as well. And we talked about this yesterday, but Stephanie mentioned learning from the agile approach of the tech team. And so it got me thinking about marketing planning. And when I first started working in marketing, and we would have big annual strategic planning retreats, and we would put together these documents, we'd present them to senior management, and it was the plan for the year. And it feels like now maybe then we sort of planned for 6 months, and now maybe for a quarter, that marketing really has become a lot less long range and a little really using that agile methodology. So I'd welcome your thoughts.
Yeah, the agile process was new to me coming to Silverchair, but it makes a lot of sense. And there's a lot of literature on this. There's a book called Agile Marketing that's great that talks about using the agile process in marketing. But for example, Silverchair's roadmap process, we have the short-term goals that are very specific, well-defined. We're definitely going to do it. Then we have the mid-range, and things are a little broader, a little more flexibility built in. And then there's the long-term, where we talk about things like security, and that's as specific as it gets. It's you kind of build your map out like that. And it's very useful because I know when I was at UVA, we budget our entire ad budget for the entire year. And then when suddenly a topic becomes hot and you want to advertise a backlist book, you have no room in your budget to do it. Or, something shifts. So you have limited ability to be flexible and pivot, take advantage of remnant ads, things like that. So building in a certain amount of specificity in the immediate and knowing broadly sort of the types of things you're going to do, it gives you the flexibility as you move along in your plan to be more agile.
Yeah, I think I would agree in the space I'm working in. We're not planning too far ahead, so we're trying to see how our audience is responding to content and create content that's similar or that might be on a similar topic. So it's, I think, more of an iterative planning process than a long-term one.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's just become that way when you have different types of content and products that you're marketing. I mean, we can plan out a conference schedule a year in advance because we know that's easy. But we don't always know, are things going to stay on track? Is this going to get killed? Are we going to have it? So there are things that you just have to be able to adjust for and deal with as they come up. So it's different now.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much. We're at the top of the hour, so thanks again for coming.